Now let's shift our attention to the USA. Joining us from our US office, I'd like to welcome Caroline, who will walk us through the key compliance requirements for cosmetics and OTC products in the United States. Caroline brings over a decade of experience in regulatory affairs. She previously worked with IBA, the Independent Beauty Association in the US, where she supported US beauty brands and industrial engagement. And she holds a degree in international development from Clark University and is passionate about promoting safety and regulatory clarity across the cosmetic sector. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Caroline Santillana with Reach 24H Consulting. I'm based in New York City, and I work with the U.S. team supporting our compliance work here. I'm very excited to connect with you today and to discuss cosmetic and OTC product compliance for the United States. Despite regulatory challenges globally, the beauty sector still offers unmatched opportunities. In recent years, as you know, due to COVID-19 and global economic changes, the development of many industries stagnated or even declined. But for the global beauty market, we actually saw a 10% growth from 2022 to 2023, reaching 44.6 billion US dollars. That's according to a report on the beauty industry published by McKinsey in September of 2024. And among them, the USA and China remain the two largest cosmetic markets. The US market alone is expected to exceed 11.5 billion by 2028. A consumer survey conducted by Boston Consulting Group revealed that US companies spend more on cosmetic products in the beauty industry than on fashion, entertainment, and even alcohol. And facial care and sunscreen products continue to show significant growth. In terms of sales channels, online shopping will, of course, continue to be increasingly important. In the future, it's estimated that by 2027, the sale of beauty products online will reach $4.5 billion. And so with all those opportunities in mind, it's my goal today to familiarize you with the compliance requirements for cosmetics and OTC drugs in the US. We're going to do this in 4 parts. I'm going to start with a broad introduction of the regulatory framework of the US. And then we're going to take a closer look at the federal regulations and specific US state legislations. We're going to talk about OTC, over-the-counter regulations, given that some cosmetic products in regions or countries like the EU and China are going to be regulated as drugs in the US. And then finally, we're going to close with some key compliance tips. So let's get started talking broadly with the US regulatory framework for cosmetics and drugs. I'm going to start by just discussing an overview and provide definitions. In the United States, it's the US Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, that is the agency that regulates cosmetics and drugs. And that's mainly done under the authority of these 2 laws that I'm going to be referencing throughout the presentation: the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Acts, or the FD&C Act, and the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act, the FPLA. The FD&C law does not require cosmetic products or their ingredients, other than the color additives, to have FDA approval before they go to market. The Act defines cosmetics by their intended use, so its articles are intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, sprayed, or otherwise applied to the human body for the purposes of cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering appearance. Among those products would be your general skin moisturizers, perfumes, color cosmetics for the eyes or face or lips, nail polish, cleansing shampoos, permanent waves and hair dyes, as well as deodorants. It does not, however, include soaps. And if the product is intended for therapeutic use, such as treating or preventing a disease, or affecting the function or structure of the human body, it would be considered a drug. Some products have both uses, one being a cosmetic and one being a drug. And when that's the case, products have to comply with both requirements. So again, based on this, cosmetic in one country may be considered a drug in the US. Examples of that would be dandruff shampoo, anti-caries toothpaste, and sunscreen. The very first thing we're going to want to do is understand how products fit into each of these categories. It's incorrect product classification. That's one of the main reasons why a product may be rejected when being imported into the United States. Generally speaking, FDA defines the product categories primarily based on the intended use. So how is intended use established? It's usually chiefly based on your product claims. Something to be aware of, though, in the US, all communications around a product can indicate the intended use. It's not just going to be your express claims or the instructions on the bottle. So this can include your product advertisements, your website, your social media promotions, influencer marketing, and more. So, for example, it's possible to have a skin cream with cosmetic packaging labeling that is completely compliant for the cosmetic category. But if outside of the packaging you make a claim like regenerates the skin, or that occurs over voiceover in one of your videos on social media or advertising copy on your website, then the FDA is going to consider that product as an OTC, because regenerates the skin is an OTC, or over-the-counter claim. So it's extremely important to be cautious with every claim around your product. And if you have specific questions about whether or not something qualifies as a claim, just please reach out to our team and we're happy to discuss with you. Besides the intended use of the product, we also have to be aware that certain ingredients will put your product into the drug category. So, for example, deodorants that contain antiperspirants are usually OTCs, because an antiperspirant is an ingredient that affects the human functions. And to look at another example, let's talk about skin whitening claims. So you can have two different products with the same claim that will whiten or lighten the skin, and one could be a cosmetic and one could be a drug, depending on the mechanisms or the function of the whitening. For example, if there's a whitening agent in the product that reduces the presence of melanin pigment in the skin, this product is going to be regulated as a drug, most likely. If the whitening function is a physical effect, like a foundation where the color just sits on top, then that would be a cosmetic. Hair growth or similar claims would also apply as drugs in the US, as well as sunscreen products with UV filtering ingredients. And we recently have seen, novel products such as microneedling products, and they could be a drug or a cosmetic, depending on the claim, the characteristic of the microneedles, the depths of the reach, and other factors. Depending on the full details of the product, it could either be a cosmetic or a medical device. And then finally, intended use may also be established by consumer perception of a product's reputation. So, for example, fluoride in toothpaste is well known to have a therapeutic effect, which is the anti-caries. So toothpaste with fluoride are going to be considered both a cosmetic and an OTC. In general, the first step is to understand what category your product fits into. And so if you determine your product is a cosmetic, then you're going to have to follow the new MoCRA compliance requirements, which I'll talk about in detail, but this slide provides a broad overview. If the products are OTC drugs, then they should meet the requirements for an OTC monograph and follow OTC facility registration and product listing requirements. Products that are both need to follow OTC facility and product listing requirements, as well as the drug and cosmetic laws. New drug applications will not be discussed today, but Reach 24H does have a drug department, so we can assist with you. So please reach out if you think that you may have a new drug application. So that's a very simple introduction on the cosmetic and drug regulatory frameworks. We're going to talk next in more detail about what compliance looks for cosmetics first. So federally, the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act, which I refer to and will refer to as MoCRA, was enacted in December of 2022, representing a significant change in US cosmetic regulations. Let's talk about the typical steps we take for compliance. First, you need an FDA establishment identifier number for your cosmetic manufacturer. The info that's needed for an FEI application covers all the basic information of the facility. The application period is up to 20 days, but we usually see it take less than a week to process. Then, once we have our FEI number, we can do the facility registration at the FDA Cosmetic Direct portal, which was previously called CDER Direct. The needed information for that would include the facility registration, the FEI number from step 1, the name and address of the facility, and certain product information. If there are changes to any of those details, you must notify FDA within 60 days via an amendment. Otherwise, this registration just needs to be renewed every 2 years, so biannually. If you are a foreign facility, then you're also going to need a U.S. agent, and the agent just serves as the primary point of contact for the FDA, handling inquiries and ensuring prompt responses. Meanwhile, our team will also be reviewing the formulations and the labeling to make sure that they meet the federal labeling and ingredients laws that I mentioned previously, and which I'll overview in more details later. That product, and after that, the product listing will be conducted, and the product listing must be renewed annually. And it should be noted that unlike a responsible person in the EU or China, for the US, the responsible persons do not need to be based in the US. Responsible persons under MoCRA are defined as the manufacturer, packer, or distributor of a cosmetic product whose name appears on the label of such a cosmetic product. Besides the facility registration and the product listing, you also have to prepare safety substantiation evidence for MoCRA. And it's the responsible person for a cosmetic product that must ensure and maintain records that support safety substantiation, which I'm going to discuss next. So MoCRA's new requirement for safety substantiation does represent a significant change for the US regulations. The requirement is similar to that of OTC drugs. Cosmetics without proof of safety will be considered adulterated. And so there's some key details within this definition to consider. For instance, the definition alludes to the fact that safety substantiation must be completed by a toxicologist who has experience evaluating cosmetic products and their ingredients. You can also rely on various sources to substantiate, such as test, study, research, or analysis. And MoCRA doesn't specifically stipulate what tests are needed to substantiate safety, and they don't say the UK or EU product safety report meets the requirements, but it's thought within the industry that these three tests are going to be essential. 1, a toxicological assessment of ingredients. 2, preservative efficacy testing. And 3, an HRIPT, or a human repeat insult patching test. MoCRA also requires the product substantiation records be maintained in case of an FDA inspection. So in addition to safety substantiation, MoCRA requires responsible persons to submit reports of serious adverse events and to keep records of all other adverse events. So that means companies need the infrastructure, processes to receive, track, monitor, and report adverse events from any of their consumers. RPs must submit reports of serious adverse events to the FDA within 15 days after the report is received. And within a year after submitting the report of a serious adverse event, if an RP receives new and material medical information related to that event, then the RP must submit that information to the FDA no later than 15 days after receipt of the new information. The FDA believes that if the FDA believes that your serious event was caused by a fragrance or flavor ingredient in the formulation, then the RP is required to provide the FDA with a list of ingredients of that fragrance or flavor or the category of ingredients within 30 days. And for that reason, we suggest that the RP be familiar with the fragrance and flavor ingredients in your products. Only adverse events that are defined as serious, which would include death, life-threatening experiences, hospitalization, disability, birth defects, infections, or significant disfigurements are required to be reported to the FDA, and the serious event itself must take place in the United States. The form to report a serious event is Form 3500A, and that has to be completed and sent to the FDA via email with a copy of the product label. The USRP is required to keep and maintain records of all adverse events within the US, including non-serious ones, for 6 years. If the brand is considered a small business as defined by MoCRA, then the records need only be kept for 3 years. It's important to ensure record keeping and maintenance procedures are in place, as the FDA can request to see adverse event records anytime during an inspection. It's highly recommended that there's an internal process for managing adverse event reporting and FDA inspections. So in sum, the key regulations under MoCRA are facility registration, product listing, safety substantiation for your products, and adverse event reporting and record keeping. So beyond the new requirements for MoCRA, let's circle back to the FNDC Act and FPLA. They both, between them, lay out regulations for cosmetic ingredients and labeling. So let's get started just talking about ingredients. Under US law, again, products and ingredients other than color additives do not need pre-market approval from the FDA, but the FD&C Act does prohibit any ingredients that make products harmful when consumers use it, per the directions on the label or in the customary or expected way. And unlike the EU, there are few banned or restricted ingredients in federal cosmetic laws. The banned or restricted ingredients generally are those that can cause cancer or other health problems. And for the protection of water environments, microplastics are prohibited in any rinse-off products, which would include toothpaste. And so, although there are only 11 ingredients that are banned or restricted, it's important to note that federal regulations do not prohibit US states from designating their own banned or restricted substances in cosmetics. And many states do have additional lists of banned substances. So companies need to pay extra attention to the states, which we're going to talk more later. So now, you heard me reference that cosmetics and ingredients do not need pre-market approval, but color additives do. Each color additive is permitted only for the intended use stated in its listing regulation. The color additive regulations are divided into two categories. First, the approved color additives that are exempt from batch certifications. Those are listed in 21 CFR Part 73, and those subject to batch certifications, which are listed in 21 CFR Part 74. Most color additive lakes are listed in Part 82 and are required to be certified. The color additives exempt from certification tend to be substances derived from plant, mineral, animal sources, whereas the colors that are subject to certification are typically synthetic organic dyes and pigments. The color additives subject to batch certification means that every batch of these color additives should be sent to the FDA and get the batch certification before use. The color additive listing regulation generally follows a format consisting of the identity, color of an additive, a description of the permitted uses and restrictions, purity specifications, and labeling requirements. It's important for a manufacturer to make sure that each color additive in a product is permitted for the intended use and complies with all the regulations that are applicable. Several precautions that are going to help you avoid color additive violations. One is don't confuse certified colors with their uncertified counterparts. And so let's take FD&C yellow number 5. That is the certified form of tartrazine, and it's approved for use in cosmetics generally. But tartrazine, which has not undergone FDA analysis and received FDA certification, may not be substitute or identified in an ingredient declaration as FD&C yellow number 5. The second tip is do not confuse certified colors with colors identified only by a color index number or CI number or the E number, which is sometimes used in European color identification. In more detail, you must not use colors subject to certification unless FDA has certified the batch in question. A CI number or the E number will not indicate alone if it has an FDA certification. And so when purchasing your color additives that are subject to certification, check the label. If the lot is certified, the colors label must state the legal name for the color, such as FD&C yellow, or if it's a mixture, the name of each ingredient, the FDA lot certification number, and the color's uses and restrictions as stated in the CFR. And so now we've discussed banned ingredients, restricted ingredients, and color additives. Let's pivot and talk about the federal labeling requirements. In the US, cosmetic product labels require a principal display panel and an information panel with specific information mandate for each of those. The PDP is the part of the label that is most likely to be seen by consumers at point of sale. Consumer labels must be primarily in English, but if a product is distributed in a territory where another language is predominant, like Spanish or Puerto Rico, then you can use that language instead of or in addition to English. If the label contains any foreign language representation, then all of the legally required information must also appear in that language. For products with outer packaging or only direct packaging, then the PDP must be labeled with the name of the product, a statement of the product's identity, the net contents of the product, and when applicable, the warning provision of 740.10 of the FD&C Act. The statement of identity refers to the name that identifies the cosmetic product. It can be a common or usual name, a description name, or even a fanciful title as long as it's easily understandable by consumers. Additionally, illustrations that depict the intended use of the product are allowed to be used. However, the statements should not reference a specific ingredient unless it's clear that other ingredients are also present. The 740.10 warning is a warning label on the PDP that is used when the cosmetic product contains an ingredient for which adequate substantiation of safety has not been obtained. The information panels are typically located on the back and side of the product's packaging. Information panels must contain specific details like the product's use method, name and place of business, any warnings and facts, list of ingredients, and any other required information. Any other required information could be, say, the country of origin for imported products, because that's a requirement of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency. This should be the country where the product underwent substantial transformation. So also know in some cases abbreviations, for example, PCR for the People's Republic of China, will not be acceptable. And as mentioned, MoCRA's labeling requirements, MoCRA's updates to labeling requirements means that we have to list the contact information of the responsible persons so they can receive adverse event reports. Products for professional use must also bear specific labeling, indicating that the product shall be administered or used only by a licensed professional. Professional in this case is defined as an individual who's licensed by an official state authority to practice in the field of cosmetology, nail care, barbering, or esthetician. And while the date of production and expiration date is not required, we do recommend labeling it. For products with inner packaging, the name of the product must be on the front panel, and other information such as use method, warnings, business information, net content, etc., must be labeled on the information panels of the inner packaging. And if the weight is less than 1/4 ounce, or if the volume is less than 1/8 fluid ounce, then those small cosmetic packages only require the smallest font on the inner packaging with the name and address of the manufacturer along with the relevant warning statements. The declaration of net quantity must appear on the labels. For solids, viscous, and aerosol products, then the net weight must be listed, while for liquids, you're doing the volume. The imperial system, ounces and pounds, is mandatory, but the metric system, such as grams and liters, can be included in brackets. The label must provide the full name and address of the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. This information is what identifies the responsible person we've been discussing for the product in case of inquiries or issues. If the name or address are not those of the manufacturer, then the label must state manufactured for or distributed by or some similar wording. The list of ingredients should be reported with the International Nomenclature of Cosmetic Ingredients, or INCI names. In the absence of an INCI name, you may also use the given United States Pharmacopoeia, National Formulary, Food Chemical Codex, USAN, and the USP Dictionary of Drug Names. EU and US names can be harmonized. For example, water, parentheses, aqua, or beeswax, parentheses, Sarah Alba. Ingredients must be listed in descending order based on their weight, except for those below 1% in colorants. Similar to the EU regulation, the generic name fragrances can be used, and the term, quote, may contain, followed by a color name for products with different shades, such as colored cosmetic products, is permissible. Companies can request a trade secret status for an ingredient, which would allow them to be listed as and other ingredients in the ingredient list, but this requires a formal process with the FDA and is rarely granted. Certain types of cosmetic products will also require specifically worded warnings. For example, all sun tanning preparations that don't contain sunscreen ingredients are required to carry this warning on the statement on the label. Cosmetics in self-pressurized containers such as aerosol products, feminine deodorant sprays, children's bubble bath products, and others are required to have specific warnings. The warning statements must be prominent and conspicuous, and so companies with these products need to pay extra attention to these warnings. In addition to all of those new requirements from MoCRA, additional provisions will be enforced in the near future. At this time, the proposed rule for good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, will be delayed until October 2025. It was originally scheduled for December of 2024, but this delay offers businesses additional time to prepare for compliance. The final GMP rule is not expected until at least October of 2026. MoCRA also required the FDA to issue a rule on fragrance allergen labeling by June 2024. The rule is still pending for release. MoCRA mandates that each fragrance allergen present in a cosmetic product be listed on the product label to inform consumers about any potential allergens they may be exposed to. And currently, we suggest that industries refer to the EU's approach to fragrance allergen transparency to prepare for MoCRA's future requirements. The FDA has issued a proposed rule on testing methods for asbestos last year, and the final version should be coming soon. MoCRA also requires FDA to publish a PFAS report to assess the use of PFAS substance in cosmetic product and the scientific evidence regarding the safety of such use in cosmetic products. However, numerous states have already taken action, either by proposing or enacting legislation that specifically targets the presence of PFAS in consumer goods. Because these chemicals are so persistent, PFAS accumulate in the environment and humans, they've earned the name forever chemicals. According to the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 97% of the U.S. population has some PFAS in their bodies, and states have taken the initiative to establish their own PFAS regulation, in their view, attempting to fill gaps left by the federal oversight. So this patchwork of state laws does pose significant challenges for industries, and companies should know and follow the state laws for PFAS, which we'll review a little bit more later on. So that wraps up our look at the federal level. We're next going to talk about states. So on the face of it, while U.S. cosmetic regulations on the federal level do look less cumbersome than, say, the EU, each state can create and enact laws, and they've become increasingly more active in this area. Several U.S. states have extensive requirements for cosmetics. State-specific laws must be considered by manufacturers and distributors selling cosmetics in the U.S. For example, California Safe Cosmetics Act, Washington Toxic-Free Cosmetics Act, and the Washington Children's Safe Products Act. FDA's rules for cosmetics are less extensive than some other product categories like drugs or medical devices. And so while MoCRA imposed several new requirements for cosmetic manufacturers and brands, some state legislatures are still pursuing additional regulations, particularly in regards to ingredient safety and transparency. And so again, while on the face of it, US regulations may seem like they're less strict and more simple to comply with, the US states are developing stricter, unharmonized, and rapidly changing regulations. And so this means any company doing business in the US has to pay attention to these state level issues as they develop. Among the US states, California is the most proactive and stringent, so we're going to start there. Here's just an overview of some of the crucial laws and agencies in California. So California has its own FD&C Act, and it's called the California Sherman Food and Drug Cosmetic Law. The California Safe Cosmetic Act of 2005 requires cosmetics manufacturers to report to the CDPH all products containing the presence of any ingredient identified as a chemical causing cancer or reproductive toxicity, regardless of its concentration within the formula. The Cosmetics, Fragrance, and Flavor Ingredient Right to Know Act of 2020 mandates that a manufacturer of a cosmetic disclose the fragrance allergens information to CDPH. Proposition 65, officially known as the Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act of 1986, requires cosmetics to disclose certain potentially harmful ingredients to consumers on the label. The Toxic Free Cosmetic Act makes California the first state to establish a state-level ban of 24 ingredients from the beauty and personal care products. There's also the Volatile Organic Compounds Emission Reduction, which tries to address air pollution from products in order to mitigate VOCs. So manufacturers and distributors may need to work with various state government agencies in addition to the federal FDA. One of CDPH's functions is to oversee the safety of cosmetics sold in California. So the OEHHA, or the OEHA, is responsible for evaluating health risks from environmental chemical contaminants. Prop 65 is administered by OEHA. The Department of Agriculture is what oversees organic claims, and the Consumer Products Regulatory Program of CARB is important, and is an important part of the overall effort to reduce the amount of volatile organic compounds, toxic air contaminants, and greenhouse gases that could be emitted from consumer products. And finally, the DTSC has a Safe Consumer Products Program, which covers certain nail products. So those are the various California state laws and agencies. Now we're going to talk about 5 steps of how to comply. So first, you're going to consider banned ingredients. Second is look closely at Prop 65. Third, we're going to talk about the CSCP and their collection of hazardous or potentially hazardous ingredients. We're also going to talk about VOC requirements and then other state activities. On September 30, 2020, the Governor of California signed Assembly Bill 2762 into law, also known as the Toxic Free Cosmetics Act, making California again the first to establish a state-level ban of ingredients. The bill, as of January this year, prohibits a person or entity from manufacturing, selling, delivering, or holding for sale in commerce any cosmetic product that contains any of several specified intentionally added ingredients. Many of the products were already banned or restricted in Europe, and the law does clarify that products that contain a technically unavoidable trace quantity of one of the 24 ingredients, or trace quantities that stem from impurities, from natural or synthetic ingredients, or the manufacturing process, storage, or migration from packaging, then the trace quantity shall not count against the cosmetic and cause it to be in violation of the law. In 2023, Assembly Bill 496 expanded that list, and another 26 ingredients will be added in 2027. California also has new consumer product regulations for PFAS, which went into effect this year. Assembly Bill 2771 bans the manufacture, delivery, or sale of any cosmetic product containing intentionally added PFAS, which started in January this year. Again, this regulation targets intentionally added PFAS, and the bill does not set an upper limit on fluorine content in cosmetics where PFAS is not intentionally added. Let's move on to Proposition 65. Prop 65, again known as the Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act of 1986, mandates that businesses operating in California provide clear and reasonable warnings to consumers before knowingly exposing them to chemicals that could cause cancer or birth defects. OEHA administers Prop 65. OEHA publishes a list of chemicals known to cause cancer or birth defects or other reproductive harm. Usually, OEHA updates this list annually, and now it includes over 1,000 chemicals. When a chemical is added onto the Prop 65 list, a company has a grace period of 12 months to comply with adding the label. So take in March 2025, for example, the two substances listed on the slide were added to the list. And so if your product were to contain one or both of those, then you have until March of next year to comply with the warning labels. And do know Prop 65 covers a huge range of consumer products, including textiles, toys, furniture, cosmetics, and other hard goods. Prop 65 covers manufacturers, importers, distributors, retailers, and suppliers who handle consumer products within and outside of California, as long as the products are going to expose Californians or individuals in California, rather. So you need to make sure the warning label meets the requirements of Prop 65, including a bolded warning and language explaining that the product can expose consumers to chemicals, which are known to the state of California to cause cancer, birth defects, and other reproductive harm. And then finally, you need the web address for OEHA's Prop 65 website. So these are some of the examples of the Prop 65 warning labels from OEHA. You can use a full length or short form warning, and you can use the yellow triangle or the black and white triangle. So traditionally, manufacturers had often opted for the generic short form warning labels with just the statement cancer and reproductive harm. However, OEHA considers the widespread use and vagueness of the warning to have diluted its effectiveness. In an attempt to address this, a new ruling mandates that the short form warning labels also have to specify which chemical is responsible for the warning and the specific associated risk. So for example, an updated label might read cancer risk from exposure to specific chemical, or can expose you to specific chemical, a carcinogen. The new labeling requirements took effect in January of this year, and there's a 3-year transition period before enforcement, meaning that by January 1st of 2028, any product manufactured and labeled has to comply with the updated rules. So until January of 2028, products labeled before this with the old short form requirement can remain on the market. And the financial penalty for non-compliance with Prop 65 can be as high as $2,500 a day for each individual violation. Interestingly, unlike other California cosmetic laws, Prop 65 can be enforced through civil lawsuits brought by public enforcers or private individuals operating in the public interest. Private individuals, referred to as bounty hunters, are usually lawyers and their clients, which are often companies established solely to act as plaintiffs in Prop 65 litigation. Will scour companies' products for likely violations. They might go out and purchase suspected products and perform their own tests even. And if a lawyer successfully identifies an offending product, then they will send the company that is selling the product and any other suppliers who had a hand in making the product a Prop 65 60-day notice. And once one of these parties issues a notice of violation or an NOV and files a lawsuit against the business, then the burden of proof shifts to the defendant, which must then demonstrate that its product does not contain the chemical in question outside of levels set out by Prop 65. In 2024, there were over 4,300 notices that were filed in the California Attorney General's office by approximately 40 individuals. That was up from the previous year of about 4,100, and it was the highest number filed in any year since Prop 65's inception. And cosmetic products are one of the top targeted industries. Top targeted chemicals include metals like lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic, titanium dioxide, DEA, and others. Again, the financial penalty is up to $2,500 per day for each product that is out of compliance. The plaintiffs or private enforcers who succeed in their lawsuits are entitled to up to 25% of the civil penalties assessed by the court, plus reimbursement for attorney's fees. The latter detail is important. It notes it's not the plaintiff or even the OEHA that receives the lion's share of funds awarded for California Prop 65 suits. Instead, the chief beneficiary of these judgments are attorneys. Most of Prop 65 violations are actually settled out of court because of the significant cost and because businesses have to prove that no violation occurred. According to the Los Angeles Times analysis of state data, attorneys' fees account for nearly 3/4 of the more than 300 million that has been paid out in Prop 65 settlements since 2000. In some instances, specific companies are targeted in multiple suits from multiple plaintiffs, resulting in substantial payouts. In others, businesses are forced into large six-figure settlements by a single advocacy group and their law firm. So Prop 65 is crucial for businesses operating in California. All right, here's some suggestions for Prop 65 compliance. First of all, your manufacturers and brand owners need to understand every ingredient used in your products, identify substances in your products, including potential contaminants, and determine if any of them are listed on Prop 65. Work with suppliers to obtain certifications or disclosures about listed chemicals and raw materials and components, and include a Prop 65 compliance clause in your supplier contracts. Maintain detailed records, including test results, certifications, and communications regarding Prop 65, as the documentation could be invaluable if there's a litigation. Moreover, we recommend you have an experienced Prop 65 counsel to review compliance programs, assess potential liabilities, and develop strategies to mitigate risk. I want to take a quick aside to talk to you about the PCPC titanium dioxide lawsuit in 2024. In short, the plaintiff, Personal Care Products Counsel, had filed a constitutional challenge to the titanium dioxide warning requirement back in May of 2023. In June 12, 2024, the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of California had preliminarily enjoined the California Attorney General and all private enforcers of California Prop 65 from filing new lawsuits to enforce the warning requirement for titanium dioxide. However, the order does not alter any existing consent decrees, settlements, or other agreements related to Prop 65. But this case is the third as applied First Amendment challenge to Prop 65 to prevail on preliminary injunction. Titanium dioxide is a very common notice substance for Prop 65, and so we need to wait and monitor this for the final judgment. The third compliance step in California is the California Safe Cosmetics Program. Any cosmetic product sold in California which contains an ingredient on the CSCP list has to be reported to CDP. The CSCP list contains 3 different types of ingredients considered hazardous: CMR substances, substances from the Prop 65 list, and fragrance allergens. There are more than 3,300 substances on the CSCP list, and the fragrance allergens, which are the same as the allergens in the are the same ones in the EU cosmetic regulation. Up till now, there are more than 14,000 products that have been reported involving more than 1,000 companies and almost 350 ingredients. The report portal is the California Safe Cosmetics reporting portal. You'll need the following information. Pretty much, you'll need to include all of the basic information about your product except for a UPC. A UPC, or Universal Product Code, is a 12-digit scannable barcode found on the product that identifies products and their manufacturers. You can buy your UPC code from GS1, which is the only legitimate producer of UPC codes. The challenge in applying for a UPC code is to correctly know the number of products that will need the codes. In short, you're going to need a different code for each product, including different sizes, volumes, flavors, and other details. And so we recommend you start compiling this information before you start the online process of registration. Some of the information is optional, like the company's internal product ID or the contents of your reported ingredients. And you can go back and revise or delete information that's been submitted. So besides California's banned ingredients, Prop 65, the CSCP reporting process, California is also the first state to ban the sale of cosmetics tested on animals. The animal test ban went into effect in 2020, and it covers both products, finished products, and component ingredients, but only if they were sold in California or tested on animals after the 2020 effective date. The law contains some significant exceptions and exemptions. For instance, it does not apply to animal tests that were conducted on any product or ingredient subject to the requirements of Chapter 5 of the Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act, which concerns drugs and devices. In addition to domestic regulatory agency, the law exempts animal tests conducted to comply with the requirement of a foreign regulatory authority. California does also have stricter VOC control for certain cosmetics. The California Air Resources Board Consumer Products Program focuses on reducing the amount of volatile organic compounds, toxic air contaminants, and greenhouse gases that are emitted from chemically formulated consumer products. The deodorants, hairspray, cleaning products, spray paint, and insecticides are examples of common consumer products that are made with these ozone-forming chemicals. Here's an important table to clarify how the new VOC levels apply to personal fragrance products in 2023. So that's California's main legislation for cosmetics. Considering the US doesn't have a federal ban on cosmetic testing on animals, here's 12 states that have banned cosmetic testing on animals. Moreover, a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers has introduced the Humane Cosmetic Act, which would ban the practice. It has yet to become law, but it is progressing. Let's talk about PFAS. In the US, in the 2021 No PFAS in Cosmetics Act, proposed in Congress, aimed to ban PFAS in cosmetics such as makeups, moisturizers, and perfume. The FDA is required to assess the use of PFAS in cosmetics and publish a report summarizing those by December of this year, 2025. The EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency, also has authority under the Toxic Substances Control Act, TSCA, to review new chemicals and uses of PFAS. While there's no national mandates, state-level actions have started with bans on intentional use of PFAS. A quick summary of some of the states with cosmetic PFAS regulations. So California has 2 PFAS laws that have taken effect on January 1st of 2025. So the PFAS Free Beauty Act of 2022 bans the sale of cosmetics with intentionally added PFAS, and then the Toxic Free Cosmetic Act of 2021 bans the product with any of 13 specific PFAS, among other chemicals. Colorado has the PFAS Chemicals Consumer Protection Act of 2022, which bans the sale of cosmetics with intentionally added PFAS. And then Maine, the Act to Stop PFAS Pollution requires manufacturers of products with intentionally added PFAS to submit written notification to the State Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP, which would include a description of the product and the reason for adding PFAS. It bans the sale of any new products with intentionally added PFAS as of January 1st, 2030, unless the DEP determines that PFAS is unavoidable. And so with multiple state bans going on, going into effect as early as this year, the intentional use of PFAS in cosmetic is rapidly coming to an end. And while not directly related to product ingredients, there are some recent state laws that are developing and companies should be aware of. Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR, and Post-Consumer Recycle PCR content laws have been gaining traction in the cosmetics and personal care industry. EPR laws make producers responsible for the entire life cycle of their product, including waste management and recycling, to encourage sustainable practices, innovation, and reduce environmental impact. PCR laws require the use of recycled materials in new product, the intention being to promote circularity and reliance on virgin plastics. So with this table, as of now, 7 states have enacted some EPR laws that would impact cosmetics. And then for PCR, Washington State is the latest to enact a law that would impact the cosmetics industry. Okay. So that's a wrap on our deep dive into federal regulations for cosmetics. Now we're going to turn to OTCs. So certain products are classified as OTCs in cosmetics, and for an OTC product to be marketed, it has to fit within a framework of an OTC monograph. If there is no OTC monograph that matches the product, then again, you would go to the new drug application route. OTC monographs define the safety, effectiveness, labeling of an OTC ingredient. If a drug is included in an OTC final monograph, companies can manufacture and market that OTC product without FDA pre-approval. The US OTC monograph system currently consists of approximately 88 monographs with 26 broad therapeutic categories covering around 800 active ingredients for over 1,400 different uses in OTC drugs. OTC compliance requires a facility/establishment registration and a product listing, and the process is more complicated compared to what we looked at for cosmetics. First, similarly, the facilities or establishment have to register for a DUNS, a Data Universal Numbering System code, and an FEI number. The DUNS code is a unique 9-digit global identification code used for enterprise identification. Foreign facilities or establishment also need a U.S. agent responsible for communication with the local agencies. And after the facility registration, drug manufacturers need to apply for a national drug code, or NDC, from the FDA and submit the NDC code to complete the listing. Safety substantiation is also required for OTC drugs. Going back to the National Drug Code, the NDC, it's a 10-digit code that's used to track drugs in the United States, structured in 3 segments. The FDA assigns the first segment, the labeler code, while the drug company assigns the product and packaging codes before submitting the drug to the FDA listing. The labeler code must be obtained before a drug can be listed, and the manufacturer distributor assigns the product and package codes. Generally, the NDC labeler code is assigned only once to each company and typically will not expire. Drug manufacturers must submit an electronic request in SPL format containing the company's primary location, operation, and contact information to obtain a labeler code. Foreign entities must have a U.S. agent to submit a labeler code, and additionally, a new product code must be included when there's any change to the information, to the following information: a drug's established or proprietary name, any active pharmaceutical ingredient or the strength of any active pharmaceutical ingredient, the dosage form, a change in the drug status between prescriptive or non-prescriptive, a change in the drug's intended use between human and animal, or the drug's distinguishing characteristics such as size, shape, color, code, imprint, flavor, or scoring if there's any. According to the FDA, all OTC drug establishments that formulate, process, pack, manufacture, and distribute OTC drugs in the U.S. must register and list all their drug products with the FDA. Applicants must submit an electronic request using the structured product label format, or SPL format. The structured product labeling format, or SPL format. Companies outside of the U.S. must have a U.S. agent assigned to them who will be the FDA's primary point of contact. And unlike the free facility registration for cosmetics, there's an annual user fee for OTC facilities. The FDA OTC monograph drug registration fee for the year 2025 is over $37,000 for MDF facilities and over $25,000 for CMO facilities. And registration has to be renewed annually between October and December. If the drug manufacturer differs from the brand owner, as in cases with private label distributors or contract manufacturers, then the brand owner or the private label distributor should be responsible as the responsible party for OTC products, handling the NDC application, labeling compliance, and product listing. In other words, if the manufacturer of the drug items does not own the brand of the drug, then the brand owner firm will obtain the labeler code and list the OTC drug. Under the FDA's OTC Monograph Drug User Fee Program, or MUFA, all facilities involved in OTC manufacturing, whether own brand MDF or contract manufacturer, must pay an annual user fee in the subsequent fiscal year. There are no FDA yearly user fees for the distributor of OTC products. In the US, OTC drug products must comply with the current Good Manufacturing Practices, or CGMP, regulations as outlined in 21 CFR Parts 210 and 211. These regulations are enforced by the FDA and ensure that OTC drugs are manufactured to meet standards for identity, strength, quality, and purity, thus guaranteeing safety and consistency for consumers. Additionally, manufacturers and packers and distributors of OTC drug products are responsible for adverse event reporting. Here are some examples of drug claims that relate to cosmetic products that could be classified as drugs in the US. Some of them have OTC monographs, while others do not, meaning that they would be a new drug. And so if you want your product to be listed as a cosmetic and not regulated as drug, we recommend very carefully considering your claims and, of course, your ingredients. And so that's all for cosmetics and OTC regulations and compliance in the US. I'm going to do a quick summary. So the first step to product compliance in the US is to understand what product category your product fits into, according to the definitions of cosmetics and drugs. If it's a cosmetic, we should follow MoCRA's requirements for free facility registration and product listing, and be aware that the use of color additives. Besides federal laws, many states have their own specific cosmetic legislation, especially regarding ban ingredient lists, labeling requirements, PFAS regulations, children's product programs, and more. If the product belongs to the OTC drug category, ensure it meets all the requirements of the OTC monograph, and the facilities need to pay an annual fee and comply with mandatory GMP requirements. State regulations rarely address drug regulations, but there are occasional exceptions, like the state of Hawaii, which bans certain sunscreen and active ingredients in OTC monographs that are harmful to corals. Additionally, Maui and Hawaii counties have gone further, banning the sale of all non-mineral sunscreens. This means that in these counties, only sunscreen containing mineral ingredients like zinc oxide or titanium oxide are allowed. In short, in the US, cosmetics and OTC drugs are regulated by the FDA, but with distinct requirements. Cosmetics are primarily for cleansing, beautifying, or altering appearance, while OTC drugs are intended to treat or prevent disease or affect the body's structure or function. MoCRA introduced significant changes for cosmetics, including the facility registration, the product listing, safety evidence, adverse event reporting, and GMP requirements. OTC products, particularly those established as monographs, have specific active ingredients, dosage, and labeling requirements, including a drug facts panel. And I know that was a lot. If you have questions on any portions of today's presentation, don't hesitate to reach out. Before we go, I do want to briefly share with you some of the other sectors that we serve and the ways we help other companies achieve global compliance. Here are some of our services by industry. In addition to cosmetics, we support food, household and industrial chem, agrichem, and pesticides. We also help with food contact materials and have various sustainability services. We also have a myriad of self-service tools that help regulatory teams be informed and proactive, as well as tox and safety testing. That's a wrap. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Again, please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions or just to connect with our team. Thanks so much.